Well, another great weekend of African football, in which we played the first leg of the African Football League between Wydad Casablanca and Mamelodi Sundowns. The first leg was in Casablanca, and that was the final match in the mythical Mohammed V Stadium before it closes down for renovations ahead of the 2025 Africa Cup of Nations. And for those of you that haven't had the privilege to get over there for a match, the Mohammed V Stadium in Casablanca, when one of the two Casablanca clubs, Raja or Wydad, are playing, is, in my opinion, one of the most unique and exhilarating experiences in world football. The kind of atmosphere they can generate over there is second to none. And so it's no surprise that these two teams, Mamelodi Sundowns and Wydad Casablanca, made it to the final of the African Football League. The top four of last year's CAF Champions League was the top four of this year's AFL. So you have the top four clubs in Africa at the moment: Esperance de Tunis from Tunisia, Wydad Casablanca from Morocco, Mamelodi Sundowns from South Africa, and Al Ahly from Egypt. But the team I really wanted to talk about was Mamelodi Sundowns. They are the team to look out for in Africa. For those of you that are interested in tactics, Sundowns are by far the most tactically advanced in Africa, and they play the best football too. Part of that is down to their coach, Rulani Mokwena. He's a 36-year-old genius with a football lineage. You know, his grandfather was a really talented South African player, a historic figure, Eric Sono. His father played Julius Sono. His uncle was the very famous Jomo Sono, one of the greatest personalities in South Africa, not even South African football. And Mokwena he has experience. He had experience coaching Pirates and Chippa United. He never quite played professional. He jokes that maybe sort of the God gave all the football genes to the people above him in his lineage, and he didn't have enough. But what I liked about him is that after a disappointing spell at Orlando Pirates, where he was interim manager, he goes on this trip to Europe and he just starts watching football, like everywhere. He talks about like having such a voracious appetite for football that he'll watch a match in Lesotho, he'll watch a match really like Vietnam, Thailand, and he'll just try to pick up little tidbits here and there. Why was this team doing that? Why was that coach instructing his players to do that? And he was ground hopping in Europe and watching and consuming as much football as possible. And he comes back to South Africa and he coaches Sundowns, and there's a complete change. I mean, he's in 48 matches with Sundowns. He's won 34. He has 11 draws and just 3 defeats. It's just incredible numbers. And Sundowns, they have a lot of money. They have the best squad in South Africa. But still, everybody admits that Mokwena's taken his team to another level. And so watching a Sundowns match really isn't too dissimilar to watching like your Arsenal or Manchester City play. And I know that's a crazy statement to say, but they use things like inverted fullbacks. They have like a ruthless counter press. They have, your ball playing goalkeepers. They use a lot of, modern tactical innovations that teams in Africa usually never do. Mokwena calls his philosophy, he says we like to be chameleons and we like to adapt to, certain contexts and matches. And when I asked him why he plays the kind of football he plays, because I had the privilege to interview him last year ahead of the CAF Champions League semifinal, Mokwena told me that he espouses the philosophy that he does because Sundowns as a club want to play that kind of football. And I thought that was one of the more profound things anyone's told me in football over the last really 2-3 years. He said, my style of play is this way because the club wants me to play this way. It's still something I'm thinking about for months later. Why? I think genius tacticians like Mokwena, like when you think about like Guardiola and Arteta, I think they can often get so caught up in the X's and O's. They want their players to almost be robots. Like when you're in this area of the pitch, you do X, Y, or Z, And I don't think they often give the intangibles in football their due. Meaning what? Like think about Guardiola or Arteta clashing with certain players. They've been described as dictatorial. Think about, like Ibrahimovic with Guardiola, Arteta, and Aubameyang. I think they sometimes don't account for things like momentum, unity, identity, the intangibles, the things that you can't measure, the things that you can't control to a certain extent. And so as soon as Mokwena told me that, I thought, that's like a really, really profound statement, because think about Jose Mourinho at Spurs and think about Jose Mourinho at Inter. It just didn't feel right when he was at Spurs, right? Spurs are like entertaining, they're naive, the club have an identity. And Mourinho at Spurs was like, Mourinho at Inter, at Helenio Herrera's Inter, yeah, that makes sense, right? And so that made me think that Mokwena gets the intangibles a little bit. Why are we talking about this? Because I think African interclub competitions like the Champions League, the Confederation Cup, or the Football League, I think they're not won by X's and O's. They're really won by the intangibles. These are games and trophies that are won by employing the dark arts. You have to influence the referee. You have to bolster the crowd atmosphere. You have to make sure team morale is at a high. Derive the opposition from a few hours of sleep if you can. And as successful as Mokwena has been as a head coach, he hasn't really been able to make it over the hump in these competitions. A few weeks ago, he spoke to John McKenzie of the TIFO podcast, and listen to the way he describes the African Champions League. I think he understands the immaterial off-the-pitch magic of these competitions. Listen to what he says.
It's a feeling of fighting or trying to compete against. And Jose Mourinho used this perfectly a few years ago, football heritage, because there are teams from North Africa that have won this competition many a times, like Al Ahly and Wydad, and these are the clubs that Esperance from Tunisia. These clubs have a symbolic, maybe a relationship that is very close to this relationship that we see Real Madrid having with the European Champions League. It's a romantic relationship that you can feel that the one loves the other, and even when the one wants to walk away from the other because they see potentially someone who could give them a little bit better than what they get from their current partner, but they still stay a lot closer and a lot more loyal to the one because of what history speaks about this relationship. It's the same with Sevilla, for an example, with the Europa League, and you see this happening season after season after season.
So you see, he almost says that it's inexplicable, that there's some kind of supernatural force that determines the results in these competitions. But I don't think it's supernatural, and I don't think it's random. I don't think it's due to football gods, imaginary football gods. I really do think that the intangibles matter. And sometimes the intangibles are out of the coach's hands or out of the player's hands. Sometimes it could be supporters. Sometimes it could be football administrators that make the difference when it comes to intangibles. And so that's something that I'm really watching, is that now Mamelodi Sundowns are down 2-1. They conceded an own goal and a goalkeeping error. So again, things that, as a coach will drive you crazy because you'll feel like these are avoidable errors. And they're down 2-1. They're going to go play in Pretoria at home. And what I'm wondering is, can Mokwena harness the intangibles and make sure that his side finally win one of these trophies or competitions? If he can, that's going to say something to me. It's going to show me that Mokwena is a more complete coach, a more mature coach. And I think he'll be ready to make the next step. Because of all the coaches on the continent, I really do think that Mokwena is the most special. And I think that he's the one that will be able to hopefully one day coach at some of the biggest clubs in Europe. He's that much of a genius. But it all starts really next weekend with these upcoming 90 minutes. So let's take a quick break. And when we come back, we'll go over our team of the week. So now we'll just quickly go over our team of the week. These are players that mostly play in Europe, but I really take a look at how Africans are performing all across the world. But I give a little more credence and a little more credit to players that are doing spectacular things at the highest level. And Europe at the moment is still the highest level. So this week's team of the week, we're going to start in goal with Yahya Fofana, the goalkeeper at Angers in France. Yahya Fofana kept a shutout. Angers won 2-0 in the second division in France. And Yahya Fofana has, I believe, 5 straight shutouts, 5 straight clean sheets at home. I believe they've only conceded a few goals over the last 7 or 8 games. He's just been very, very good. Not just him, but the entire defense at Angers. But Yahya Fofana has just recently joined the Ivory Coast national team, and I do believe he's going to be starting. So the fact that Cote d'Ivoire finally have, a real good goalkeeper in goal. I think even when they had the golden generation, they didn't have a super talented goalkeeper. But now they have Yahya Fofana. I think it's actually going to work quite well. So he's our goalkeeper of the week. At left back, we have Nottingham Forest Nigerian fullback Ola Aina, former Chelsea player. He scored a goal and he had a great performance defensively as well. I think Ola Aina is one of those players that I think at the beginning of the season, many Forest fans didn't think would probably be starting. They probably saw him as a squad player, but he's very much grown into his role and been quite good. The two center halves are two center halves that maybe in a few months we're going to be considering them as starters for their national teams, but at the moment are quite underrated. Wilfred Singo at Monaco, who was at Torino last year and has had a great start to the season with Monaco. They kept a shutout and he had a good number of tackles and interceptions. And FC Lorient center half Formose Mendy, Senegalese defender. He plays on the right of a 3-man back line at Lorient, but he was man of the match. He was absolutely great. And for those interested in African football, I think Lorient is a team to watch because besides him, they have the Tunisian centre half Montassar Talbi, who's quality. They have Darwin Yangwa, the Cameroonian left back. They have quite a good number of African players that are worth watching. At a right back, we have Nusayr Mazraoui, who's put in a second consecutive great performance for Bayern Munich. Bayern absolutely destroyed Borussia Dortmund this weekend, 4-0, and he had a great performance. Our 3-man midfield is going to be Mohamed Kudus of Ghana, who I can't believe none of the bigger clubs came in for him, but I really don't need to talk about him. Everybody knows how much quality he has, and that was on display for West Ham. Nabil Bentaleb from Lille, who is slowly growing into his own, and I think if he continues to perform the way he has, will cement that number 6 spot for the Algerian national team as his own. And the third in our midfield is going to be Mu'tasim al-Musrati, the Libyan center midfielder, plays for Braga. Braga won 6-1 this weekend, and al-Musrati scored the second goal with a penalty and just had a great performance. Al-Musrati is one of the more underrated players in African football. Nobody talks about him because he's Libyan, and not a lot of people watch Braga, but he's slowly, quietly been one of the best midfielders in the Portuguese Liga over the last 3 years, so very much deserving his spot in the team of the week. And finally, our front line, there was so many options here, but I went with Omar Marmoush, the Egyptian winger/forward. He scored 2 goals, and he's probably one of the hottest players in the world at the moment. If you look at his form over the last 5 matches, several goals, several assists, and a lot of Egyptians, I think, are starting to come to the realization that even if he doesn't start on the left wing, perhaps he could be a very good backup for Mustafa Mohamed as a center forward for Egypt. And they just have so much quality, along that front line. Mohamed Salah, obviously, probably the best African player. Mustafa Mohamed, great form for Nantes in Ligue 1 in France. And now you have Omar Marmoush. But, there's really a lot of options that they can use. They can use Trezeguet. So much quality along that front line. And Egypt are going to be, I think, a team that are going to be favorites at the upcoming AFCON. On the right wing, I think we all forgot about Wilfred Zaha at Galatasaray, but he scored 2 goals as Galatasaray won 2-0. So Wilfred Zaha definitely deserves his spot there, with a special shout out to Mohamed Amin Amoura, the Algerian forward/winger who scored 2 goals for RUSG in Belgium, and who is another person that's, I think, been one of the hottest players in the world over the last 8 or 9 games. Watch what he's done with the little amount of minutes that he's had, and I think you'll be as impressed as I have. And finally, the Congolese striker Simon Banza, current leading scorer in Portugal, also plays with Braga, teammate of Mu'tasim al-Musrati's. He's at 10 goals this season, and he scored a hat-trick and had an assist as Braga won 6-1 over the weekend. So that's our team of the week. This is just going to be a short segment where we're going to highlight, the top performers in Europe and around the world, just so we can keep track of it and see who's really in form heading into the AFCON. And that was this week's African Football Roundup. Thanks for following. This is just going to be a weekly check-in on Mondays or Tuesdays where we recap this week's action, and sometimes we'll have a guest. So next week we'll have a really, 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 really high-profile guest, somebody that I think you'll all be very thrilled to listen to. And don't forget that this Friday we'll have a new episode of the African Five-A-Side podcast. Last week, if you didn't hear it, we profiled Gamal Abdel Nasser, the former Egyptian president, and the relationship that he had with football. And next week, we're going to be profiling another African head of state and their policies in African football and sport. Thanks for following along. Please don't forget to like and subscribe if you've enjoyed this, and we'll see you in a few days.